Welcome. My name is Aurélie Vincent. I'm delighted to be by your side this afternoon. We are here to celebrate the 6th anniversary of the AXA Research Fund. It is a scientific philanthropy initiative that is the sole of its kind. Today, 367 projects are supported in 27 countries. What has happened over the past 6 years? How do we set up the dialogue between the world of academia, the public sector, and the private partners? This, of course, creates more and better protected civil societies worldwide. For the next 2 hours, this is what we will be covering. And before we begin, I am going to ask you to turn off your cell phones. Also, if you wish to tweet, the password, the hashtag is AXA RF. We offer here simultaneous interpretation for your comfort, and we are also webcast live on the internet. We have here two roundtables this afternoon, bringing together AXA members and researchers. And in order to help you discover more about the AXA Fund for Research, at the end of these two roundtables, we will get together for a cocktail in celebration of the 6-year anniversary. And it is my pleasure now to welcome the chairman and CEO of the AXA Group. Good evening, everyone. We are particularly delighted to welcome you here tonight, even though we regret that the President of the Republic cannot join us. You know where he is, and it is tied in with the picture that was chosen a few months ago by Godefroy Beauvalet, because he is, of course, visiting the sites of natural disasters that have just occurred and that are also tied in, as we will cover later, with what we do at the AXA Research Fund. So why am I particularly happy to see you here all tonight? I would first like to thank you for having taken the time to come. I would like to thank the members of the scientific board and the researchers and members of this vibrant scientific community that we are discovering and that we try to support and help. I would also like to thank the clients, the friends, the staff members of AXA who are here, because this demonstrates that they have a form of interest or have contributed to the development of this particular fund. I think that there are not very business areas which, like insurance, are today no longer fully convinced of what will happen in the long term and how much we need progress, innovation, and how we must hedge against risk. Now, for people who see our profession from the outside, may seem like simply putting a Band-Aid on an open wound, repairing the damage. In reality, this is not quite right. The business is involved much more deeply than just the simple damages or compensation payments. Our role is to analyze, is to watch the world, to understand it, to try to anticipate which risks we may face, so that knowledge on them grows, so that we can mitigate them, repair and minimize their consequences. And once that has been said, I think that we can clearly see that there is a point in common between the spirit of entrepreneurship of the professionals of insurance and the spirit that is guiding the scientific community in the world of research. We share a taste for extending our borders, enlarging the borders. And we know that in order to be able to do this, we need to accept what the concept of risk is in a positive light, which today, of course, is not an easy task. Many people are highly prudential regarding risk in France very often, but not only in France. And unfortunately, in too many cases, a poorly understood principle of precaution has taken control over innovation. Of course, we need to take precautions, but these must not prohibit us from taking risks. A comparison I often use is to say that if Christopher Columbus had not taken risks, if Pasteur had not taken risks, we would neither have discovered the New World nor the vaccination. So sometimes we wonder how both, who are amongst these people of an exceptional nature, who have indeed stretched the borders and narrowed the difference between the known and the unknown, would perhaps have reacted differently if they had been submitted to the current regulations. Could they have been free to do what they did? Could they have been free to help humanity progress for the better? We here have a position where we accompany risk-taking, and what more beautiful example of risk-taking than that of the scientific and research communities. Being a researcher is a calling. It is a personal demand. A calling because we dedicate our lives or a large share of our lives to it, requiring enthusiasm, rigor, a very stringent discipline, also in itself a risk, because research can sometimes last for a very long time without coming up with any positive results. And this is something that we need to support and to encourage, because if people do not feel supported or helped, then they can be discouraged. And when we see what research can contribute to our civil societies that are permanently looking for growth, stability, equity, progress, improved health, improved knowledge of risks, well, then we understand that it is fairly natural for companies such as ours to become involved. This involvement started in 2007. In fact, in reality, in the initial stages of the crisis. And we then decided to do this by analyzing a certain number of foreign examples, asking for advice, listening to the advice, including a certain number of international reputation researchers to our reflections and efforts. And we initially decided that our efforts would first be focused on areas we know better than others, that of natural disasters, that of a longer life cycle, longevity, so to speak. These are natural risks for insurers, the fears and the risks inherent to our policyholders. And also we decided that we needed to take an interest in financial and social risks. And we have created this scientific board. We have endowed it with approximately 100 million euros. When we look back today at what this scientific board has done, we are, and I think its members and the researchers they have helped can all be proud. Because in fact, we have made progress in the debate, not only in this country, but also worldwide. And we have improved the relationship between enterprises and the world of research. There is a common ground between these two populations and many, many similarities. I do not think that we here should be overly prudential when it comes to bringing together the world of business and the world of academia and science. These worlds should cross-fertilize each other, so to speak, and together, hand in hand, they can only win and make progress. This is what we've decided to do. We've spoken of the 360-odd projects that were covered and assisted in 27 countries. And when we examine today the first stage that we are reaching the end of today, this gives us a determination, the determination to continue, to go on this road, to continue and to endow again this fund. So one of the reasons that we've brought you here together tonight is that we are preparing to dedicate 100 million euros more over the next 5 years to pursue our efforts, which means that AXA, over a 10-year period, will have contributed to fundamental research to the tune of 200 million euros, which is extremely important when we know which demands we face today, is, in my opinion, a commitment which demonstrates how serious we are about this. The same also can be said in the same spirit of what was done during the first stage of this fund, but also with a slight innovation by motivating the researchers we help and the scientific community in general to dialogue more with civil society and society as a whole, because we believe that the message they are the bearers of warrants to be better known. We are here going to apply the same demand as regards quality levels, the same determination to open up to the outside world, the same determination to work on diversity, the same issues that we've mentioned, and with the same degree of conviction, which can be easily summarized. Sometimes this form of conviction can be shocking, but why keep this to ourselves? We are absolutely convinced that if our developed democratic societies want to remain competitive, they will only do so through innovation. Competitiveness, and this is certainly one of the messages that I would have liked to share tonight with the President of the Republic. Competitiveness cannot occur without innovation. Innovation cannot happen without research. Research cannot happen without excellence, and excellence cannot exist without selection. I think this is the guideline of what we are trying to do. We will pursue this task with your help, because without you, we certainly could not succeed. We will continue to comply with the AXA policies. Of course, it is in our interest, and it is in all of our interests to succeed in our area and in many others. But the company that we are bearing forward is ingrained in our DNA. The knowledge of risk, the education that can be brought by the company in this area. There is truly a link between what is done in the world of research and what we do in more humanitarian environments. In this world, in this room tonight, we have representatives of CARE, an NGO with whom we work in preventing risks in those areas of the world where national disasters occur or can occur. Also, we inaugurate a certain number of chairs in the world of academia, also as we do with some of the programs of CARE. All of this is in our framework, which corresponds to our current vision and to our values. And in fact, this is what we would like to illustrate a little more, a little better. And here I would like to quote Molière and his comment on students, which seems particularly relevant and quite well seen today at a time where accumulation of information and the difficulty of demonstrating one's judgment and discernment. Molière had said, "The brain of a student must be a candle that is lit and not a vase that is filled." And therefore, I hope that the second stage of the AXA Research Fund that we are announcing tonight will be an opportunity to grow the candle. So thank you all very much, and I would now like to ask you to watch a short video that summarizes what we have done before we inaugurate the roundtables. And before I do so, I would like to thank you.
As an insurer, our job is to protect you against risks. Hence our responsibility to help societies better anticipate them. We believe fundamental research provides key guidance to face today and tomorrow's risk. That is why we created the AXA Research Fund in 2007. Thanks to a robust academic selection process, the AXA Research Fund aims at both supporting top-tier researchers all over the world and promoting the dissemination of their discoveries in the public debate. It provides researchers with the means and the freedom to complete their work successfully.
To interact with really, really nice, like-minded people, and also people who work on the same theme but in a very different field, which is very, very interesting, because normally as a PhD student you're so in the small detail of everything that you don't really get to focus on the bigger picture. So this was a great day to really actually take back a step and look at the global picture.
Support by the AXA Research Fund goes beyond funding. AXA also provides its corporate networks and communication resources to help supported scientists go one step further in sharing their knowledge with a broader audience. In this perspective, popularization workshops and conferences are regularly organized.
Alors voyons comment se font.
So let us see how the AXA Research Fund launches concrete dialogue in favor of knowledge with the first roundtable, which is a two-way perspective of tomorrow's major risks. A dialogue between AXA experts and researchers whose projects have been supported by the fund. Each of our speakers will come to explain how he or she contributes to bettering what happens in our daily lives, in our society, and in our environment. When we talk about the increase in life expectancy, longevity, of course, is, as regards human life, the primordial issue. In order to deal with these issues, I would like to welcome Mrs. France Millet, who is a doctor at the National Institute of Demographic Studies, and her colleague as well, who works within AXA France in such issues. Ladies, welcome. So, Mrs. Talaison, you are a regular speaker on extended life expectancy, and of course, this concerns us all, and particularly mature countries. This is a subject that is particularly dear to your heart. So what are the elements that surprise and retain the attention as regards aging? Well, I think that being more aware of these issues is essential to be able to here, of course, see how this will evolve. The life expectancy levels have been multiplied by 2 over the past century. And this is extremely important. And the main consequence of this extended life expectancy, of course, is aging. To illustrate aging, I would simply like to share a few figures with you. This involves a couple of interesting bits of data. In this world, we have over 100 million people over 80 years old. And in 2050, this factor will be multiplied by 4. This, of course, involves the entire European Union, with only inhabited by people of 80 years of age. And of course, when we talk about people who live to be 100, we have 350,000 now, and by 2050, we believe that this will be multiplied by 20 and reach 6 million. So even the issue of aging is becoming global. Mature, developed, or developing countries, of course, will undergo aging, but at different speeds, and this different speed of aging can be explained by the country's demographic structure, but also by aging speeds that are different, that are specific to countries and that are difficult to understand. Particularly in the past, life expectancy was circa 65 years of age in the 1980s. And of course, this converged for most OECD countries for men and women, and then it diverged. Why convergence and then divergence? If the difference between the length of life expectancy for men and women is different, of course, we see that there is a difference. And why why is there a difference? Also, improvement to very, very old age, and such as the Japanese women, for example, who can live to be very, very old. And of course, the evolutions are extraordinary. And this brings up many, many questions regarding the evolution of life expectancy. Analyzing the causes behind mortality will help us understand the issue, to better assess the risk, and to be much more effective in terms of prevention, because we will be able to impact some pathologies more readily. Mrs. Millet, to cover these different causes, you have gone from the causes of death to the study of the origin of these causes. The idea that all cause of death at a given moment can be avoided. Is this one of the reasons that you decided to focus on this? Yes, of course. When we look back to the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, there has been extraordinary growth in life expectancy. The growth itself was due to victory against infectious diseases. Then, of course, this was followed by cardiovascular disease controls and the reduction of death in childhood and longer living human beings. All of the sanitary progress is not just based on medical advances, but on economic and social progress as well. And in my opinion, they did not happen at the same pace for everyone. Some countries benefited from this earlier on. In general, women benefited from this a little earlier than men, and in some cases, some social categories have been left lagging behind. So to be able to understand all of these evolutions and to be able to forecast what will happen in the future, in my opinion, we need to study the causes of death. So how does your work help us understand this better? The causes of death is a very interesting material per se. Of course, we have known now for the past 50 years that this data is of fairly good quality. But it is difficult to compare these causes over time and over space, because there are inter-country differences, particularly as regards how to classify the data in question over time. To be able to provide a very specific analysis, we need here to go through a slightly difficult phase of reconstruction, as we say in our jargon, in order to align all the information. Well, this is where the funding we received from the AXA fund was quite useful, because this requires many human resources, bringing together researchers who work in their own countries and who come together to share the data that they collect. And of course, here we have MODI-COD, so it's causes of divergence and causes of death. This has brought together researchers from Europe, from the US, from Japan, to try to set up a full set of data from the 1980s that can be comparable between countries throughout the evolution. So more concretely, what will the results of your research yield? Well, quite concretely, we will have a database that we will make available to the community of researchers, as well as to all of the public stakeholders. And there is database available. This database will be available on the internet. Also, we will have analytical tools to be able to study the evolutions of the causes of death. And this then can be of service to others than just ourselves. But to return to the more fundamental idea, as I was saying initially, is to construct this database in order to better answer issues such as sanitary transitions, the convergence and the divergence. For example, how and why can we understand that Eastern European countries or the USSR have found it more difficult to find a cure or treatment for cardiovascular diseases? Why is a country like France today very good at lengthening life at a much older age, whereas other countries such as the US and the Netherlands at some point in their history seem to slow down? Why do men today, why are men today progressing more quickly than women around 60 years of age, but much less quickly than women when they reach 80 or 90 years of age? These new risks, how can we plan for them? What will be the consequences of obesity, of neurodegenerative diseases? All the data collected in our database will be used to support comparative analyses in all countries, which would help us to globally think out investment and protection policies. Thank you. Mrs. Tadizo, how do you make use of this research? Could they be applied to other areas than just extended life expectancy? Well, yes, absolutely. As an insurer today, when we take an interest in longevity or longer life expectancy per country, we believe that this data will be extremely useful. But also, if we take a risk such as longer life expectancy, if we are hoping to have a database comparable between countries where we have the analysis of the loss of autonomy due to neurodegenerative diseases such as dementia, for example, or due to an accident. Also, the differences in the degrees of incapacity, for example, between the countries, which would be very interesting in terms of public policies, sanitary policies, insurance policies. And of course, since we are in an aging country, we find that this is a major interest for us. Also, as regards dependency, we could certainly be more effective as regards the prevention of the precise causes that in fact generate the state of dependency. The areas to study are extremely numerous. How can we anticipate risks? Well, on extended life expectancy, research is plethora and extremely interesting. There are transdisciplinary projects. And with extended life expectancy, there are many researchers working on the longevity gene. Also, much work is being carried out of this type. And I have an example in mind, actually, which is the growth hormone. We believed at some point in our history that it was a good idea to inject the growth hormone to the elderly. There were injections for some generations of seniors, and we've in fact then discovered that it's the reverse. In other words, if you don't have any growth hormone content, you live longer. And there is a specific study in Equator, the Larone population, and they're small. They lack the growth hormone. And in fact, there are very scarce cases of cancer or diabetes in this population. And longevity is always filled with surprise, and work is tremendously enriching. So aging of the populations could be an opportunity for our societies. Yes, I'm intimately convinced that this is the case. Because when we think of aging, we think about an obstacle to growth and a burden, a weight on public finances, because the reduced number of the working population versus the retired population, of course, is an issue. This has an impact on retirement systems, on healthcare, or on the data related to dependency. But I believe that it can be a source of growth if we take our system of social protection. It is true that we invented it when families had 3 different generations, and the cycle of life involved education, training, professional career, and retirement. But this is something of the past now. We have families that will be as large as 5 generations. The life cycle will combine training, working years, and retirement. And if we look at Japan and Sweden, they have been able here, of course, to work on both the working life and retirement by a gradual decrease in the workload of the person to enter into retirement. So not only has this demonstrated that it was an extremely positive approach, but also there are much more active seniors in those countries. So we also have new needs as regards services, healthcare, housing, food. And so this, of course, will generate new sources of growth. I know that aging is a source of growth, and it is a much more positive correlation than what we initially imagined. Professor Mele, the growth in life expectancy, in your opinion, will this continue, and until when? Is there a limit to human life? That is a question to which we, for the moment, have no answer. But even if we do not go beyond 120 and 122 months and 122 years and 5 months, such as Jeanne Calment, we have still a lot longer time to live within the limits that we are currently informed of. I do not think there's any reason to be pessimistic. Quite the contrary, we will never be able to suppress all the causes of death, but we can today already make this end of life much more remote. Also, we must not forget that there will be new technological innovations which will allow us to move ahead. Now, in this optimistic view, I would simply like to stress two slightly less positive points, i.e. the state of health of people who survive to a very old age. On this particular subject, much research is underway to see how health is in fact evolving. Results for the moment are rather positive. We can see progress in terms of health and life expectancy. A life expectancy may be making progress a little bit faster, but as regards absolute numbers, we know that we are going to have to face an increasing number of people whose health is not as good as it should be, and where cases of dependency will perhaps be more numerous. And we will need to answer these issues that are societal issues very quickly. Also, when there are innovations, they first and foremost benefit some rather than others. And on this particular issue, inequalities once again appear to be a permanent aspect, and we will have to work hard on making sure that progress comes in at the same time that it is in fact beneficial to certain categories of the population, but to the entire population. Although, of course, we will never be able to have a full-fledged movement in the same direction in this area. To conclude, Mrs. Tarizon, I would simply like to say that managing aging is a colossal challenge for most of the countries. You were talking about dependency, and to cover such a risk as dependency, I fundamentally believe that we can set up fruitful public-private partnerships to cover this type of risk over a sustainable period and in a perennial manner. Of course, our studies on these issues will allow us to make progress and gain more knowledge on the advances of aging. And to conclude, I would say that, first of all, longer life expectancy is an absolutely extraordinary bit of news, major piece of luck. And I truly think that if aging is anticipated upon and examined from another angle, will be a bearer of growth. Thank you, ladies.
So we can see that these things that we see, they have a direct organization on the way our societies are organized. And now we're looking at another risk. In the face of the recent economic crisis, what can the study of social and economic risks teach us? Can we protect ourselves from them? And are they irremediably cyclic? So we have here with us Professor David Webb from the London School of Economics and Mr. Eric Chanet, Chief Economist for the AXA Group and Director of Research, AXA Investment Managers. So we're now going to carry on in English, so you can carry on with Canal 2.
Mr. Chane, the recent financial crisis tested the global financial system. And can you tell us why did it happen?
That's a pretty good question. It's certainly too early to answer. I think it took 50 years to have an answer to the same question about the 1930 crisis. And by the way, the answer was given by two guys, Ben Bernanke, I think you have heard of him, and Mark Gertler. So I'm going to take the risk to give you an answer. There are two schools of thought. One is that it was a financial crisis. It came from a lack of regulation, bad regulation, lack of oversight of these crazy people in the trading rooms, in the big investment banks. So that was, above all, a question of regulation. The second school of thought is that was linked to the massive imbalances that built up during the 80s and mostly during the 90s and the 2000s between the US and China, between emerging countries and developed countries. By imbalances, I mean current account imbalances, but also asset prices and the amount of credit that was associated with this period that I call stage 3 of globalization. I belong to the second school of thought, but I think that the first school of thought has also a couple of very good points to make. So I will only make 3 points. The first one is that there was a common cause, which was the very low level of real interest rates on a global basis. It is not a coincidence if there were housing credit bubbles everywhere in the world. And the common cause is this abnormally low of real interest rates. That had two reasons. One, the Fed policy, what people call in the financial markets, in the trading rooms, the Greenspan put. Each time something goes wrong in the financial markets, the Fed will inject liquidity and cut interest rates, so we can count on the Fed to keep the ball rolling. And of course, that leads to markets expecting interest rates to remain very low, and that is one of the causes of this low level of rates. The second one is the elephant in the room. I mean, China entering into the global economy as a more and more powerful market economy, which the development model was based on exports. And the accumulation of current account surpluses by China led to a massive investment in the only safe and liquid asset that is available in this global system, which is US government bonds. And that is the second reason why interest rates were so low. So that is the first part, or actually there are two parts. But I have to say that regulation was also at the heart of what happened. I see the financial system as an amplifier of a more fundamental cause for the credit bubble that developed after 2000. And I will just take one example. Back in 2003, US investment banks asked the SEC and the Treasury to remove a barrier to their own business, which was the so-called leverage ratio. And they said, there is a problem. European banks have much higher leverage ratio than we have, and because of you guys at the Fed, we cannot do the same. The Fed looked at things and said, okay, you can go. And the leverage ratio led to this enormous credit bubble. So there was obviously a lack of oversight. Two schools, one answer. The crisis was in the pipeline, but nevertheless, everybody was surprised.
But it came suddenly as a surprise.
No, exactly. And this is, where I have to say that even though there were a lot of people who thought something would go really wrong, when it happened, it was a shock. Let me just give you two things. There was this seizure of financial markets. Suddenly, there was no more liquidity. Second thing, I'm a guy from the real economy, so I was more sensitive to the second aspect. In a matter of months, 8 weeks, global trade of manufactured products, the big things, the containers, which are crossing the seas, literally collapsed. So something happened that normally happens only in wartime. And when that happened, and even a couple of years after, there were much more questions than answers. How was it possible that the crisis was so sudden and so violent? And when I use the word Caesar, it's precisely what I have in mind. This is where we need fundamental research. We need people like Professor Webb to dig into all the details and try to answer all these questions.
So, Professor, what is your view on the crisis?
Well,
Do you think...
I'm not going to repeat what Eric just said. So I agree with most of what he said. So obviously global imbalances were super important. I'm from a finance department, the London School of Economics, a very big department. We've got a lot of researchers. So we use the skills that we've got to look into the mechanics of the system, to see just how it worked and if there are any inherent weaknesses in it, and to answer some puzzles that the crisis threw up. Now, it's no doubt, before the financial crisis, we've seen a period of unusual innovation in the financial sector. We'd seen very light regulation. We'd seen a massive growth in credit. Eric's already alluded to that. We know a lot of it was in the mortgage market, particularly in the United States, but also elsewhere. So we saw a lot of very soft lending, if you like, into the financial sector. We know that during this period of limited regulation, there was a lot of, Eric's already alluded to this, financial, what we call regulatory arbitrage, people trying to find cheaper ways of doing business. There's a big expansion in the shadow banking system, which is drawing the insurance and pension companies into funding loans to, say, mortgage loans, etc. So this is a remarkable period of change. It was a period, though, where people were quite relaxed. If you take the run-up to the financial crisis, the markets show very low levels of risk, enormous appetite for risk, tremendously liquid markets. All the measures that we would rely upon to signal risk were at very low levels before the crisis, and I'm talking about the middle of July 2007. In a sense, we were a little bit like the crew, passengers and engineers on the Titanic. We sailed away from Southampton expecting everything was okay, and eventually we hit an iceberg, and there we go. So one of the things, so in our research, we've tried to do a number of things. As I say, we look at the way the system works. So one of the things is, where did all that risk come from? It apparently wasn't there, and then when it came, it rapidly multiplied and became very significant. Something about the system allowed that to happen. So we did do a lot of risk modeling, where we're actually looking at the nature of financial institutions, their balance sheets and so on, and how they collectively create more leverage in the system and create the magnification of risk within the system. And you see an interaction then of balance sheets and market prices in quite intriguing ways. And this allows you to get a more forward-looking measure of risk, which is not just useful for regulators, but also for banks when they're actually thinking about the risks that they're actually trying to manage. But at the very heart of those models of risk are the regulatory environment. They're part of the picture. So you can't really take, say, capital buffers, liquidity ratios and so on out of that. That's part of the magnification, amplification mechanism. And we did quite a lot on that. We've looked very extensively at the working of the shadow banking model, in particular the structured financial products that were at the heart of the exercise. And we've seen here how counterparty risks combine with problems of moral hazard in the structuring of these products, and that again leading to magnification of risks. Where we've done some very extensive work, which I think is important, is to look at the actual rollover risk problems that were in the shadow banking system in 2007. And we've actually taken a very careful look at how the rollover risk works. So here we're talking about banks funding the purchase of asset-backed securities with asset-backed commercial papers. So this is bringing the insurance companies and so on into the equation. And what we see is that the interaction of collateral values with market liquidity in the funding model is at the heart of the problem, and the fact that that part of the financial system was lightly regulated and didn't have proper access to liquidity was very important in the fragility of the system during the crisis. I will mention the work that we've done on the interbank market in London, because I think this is particularly good. We did get a great deal of data from the Bank of England, very exclusive data, to look at exactly how the interbank market worked during the crisis. And what you can see is that this is the short-term funding model that the banks use in London, very important market. And there you'll see how in normal times, the liquidity of different banks in the system is quite complementary. So I've got liquidity, Eric's got liquidity, etc. The market moves smoothly. But with Northern Rock and so on, it was disrupted, and we see that liquidity dried up. Effectively, the liquidity of individual banks becomes strategic substitutes. And it's only then that you see the fundamental role of the central bank in keeping the system going. And we've actually analysed forward how QE, QE1, QE2 have worked in that system. We get a very good understanding of how it's all working. Beyond that, at a more micro level, we've done extensive work looking at the role of risk management structures in banks, and also the objective functions of banks during the crisis. We've definitely discovered, not surprisingly, that banks that had better risk management performed better, less likely to need a bailout in the United States, and banks that had better measures of performance in terms of, not necessarily return on equity, I should say, performed better during the crisis. So really, what we've done is an extensive body of work to look at the mechanics of how the system worked, but very much within the environment that Eric has just outlined. That's rather quickly said, I'm afraid, but there we are.
Thank you. This work sounds very technical, but does it add values, Mr. Chanet?
Oh, yes, it does. On different levels. But the first one is that for any company, but especially for us, for a big insurance company which has a huge balance sheet, what happened in 2008, 2009 was really bad. It hurts a lot when markets experience this kind of sudden stop. So if the fundamental research coming from the LSE helps regulators to change things so that for the next crisis, I'm afraid there will be another crisis, the consequences in terms of the turbulences in the financial market are smaller, that will be good for business, that will be good for us. That is the first layer. The second layer is that we are investors. As investors, we are very happy to be a little bit more smart, a little bit smarter, after having read some of the pieces that came from this research. I have one paper in mind that David Alliot did it too, which is the role of the chief risk officer in financial institutions. There was this fascinating study showing that depending on the level to which belonged the chief risk officer, a bank is more or less susceptible to end like RBS very badly, or BNP, which was among the winners. That was interesting. So when we invest, we listen to this kind of research. The third layer is maybe closer to our day-to-day work. If you have a slightly better understanding of the nature of the systemic risks in the financial market, then you can have some advance warnings. And of course, this has implication for the investment policy that we are pursuing.
Thank you. Professor, how this type of work disseminates beyond the academic world? Surely it must ultimately be evaluated by its impact on policy or practice.
Yes, well, that's absolutely right. I should say we have a slight advantage. We are in the absolute middle of London, so it's quite easy for us to organise dissemination events, and that's been quite central to what we do. So a lot of the work that has been disseminated through academic conferences. We've done 3 of those under the AXA brand. We ran actually 6 practitioner conferences, and we've done a series of regulatory workshops, actually about 50. It's a very regular, bi-weekly, every 2-week event. I should say that the focus of the dissemination has been much more on immediate impact. The research, if you like, is quite technical to understand what's going on. The research has been more focused on understanding the nature of macro, micro prudential regulation as it evolves. Something that I think was very important was we did organise a very big workshop on resolution mechanisms for banks. This is living wills and bail-in mechanisms. And we got a number of the chief risk officers as well as chief financial officers of major banks and some academics and some regulators to attend that. For example, Paul Tucker from the Bank of England, sadly now gone. And we discussed and had a very interesting discussion of bail-in mechanisms, in which we have done some work, these bail-in bonds such as COCOs and so on. And this work also, I should say, in different ways through those seminars and workshops has affected a little bit Basel III. We did the original work on pro-cyclicality, a little bit the Vickers report, talking about the need for counter-cyclical capital buffers under Basel III and some of the problems of implementation. We have obviously talked to the Vickers Commission about various things on banking, and we've had some interaction with the Liikanen report of the European Union, and also the UK. We did write most of the UK Foresight report on high-frequency trading, which is not unrelated to the endogenous risk issue that we did. So we've done quite a lot of stuff, and maybe it hasn't highlighted the AXA brand as much as we should have done. I should like to say that the AXA grant is quite unique, given that AXA is a French company, and I'm British. It's a kind of entente cordiale. It'd be nice to think that it would work the other way. But AXA does own a big chunk of the UK insurance company, so maybe it makes some commercial sense. So there you go. Thank you very much to AXA.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chanet, to conclude, one last question. What is the next crisis going to be about, and when is it going to happen?
It's already started.
I'll tell you a secret. I will not reveal what I know about that. No, but you know, there are a lot of things that can be said about that. There will be another financial cyclical crisis. It will be different from this one. I have one thought. One of the roots of this crisis is that the world is lopsided. To some extent, the US, the global financial system, is so much influenced by the policy decided in Washington, D.C., by the FOMC, that there is something wrong when you have such a big power, such as China, which is growing. So at some point in time, let's say after 2020, I think there will be 2 or 3, actually, currency zones. There will be the US dollar, there will be the euro if it is still there, and there will be the renminbi. So instead of having a polarized system, we will have a multipolar system. That will solve some problems and create new problems. And I guess that maybe the next crisis will be precisely what physicists would call the problem of the 3 corpses, the three masses. No analytical system can predict the movement of 3 bodies in the space. Maybe nothing can be said, can be predicted about 3 currencies gravitating, you know, around each other.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. We have covered risks associated with life sciences and with human life, rather, and then the social and economic aspects. Let us now share a two-way perspective on climate change, because climate change, of course, particularly these days, are extremely serious. How can we understand them? And are these natural disasters more violent, more frequent, and more damaging? Here we are facing much uncertainty. So since we are, how can we deal with the uncertainties and address the risks? Here, this addresses Professor Ulrich from the Freie Universität of Berlin, and Mr. Cadou, who is in charge of risk management for that branch of the AXA Group. And they are both joining me on stage.
There you are. Mr. Cadou, about climate change.
Together with the insurance industry, AXA acknowledges that a climate change is occurring. It is clearly visible, as shown by the latest scientific material, when we look at the evolutions over the recent decades of simple climate variables, such as the temperature, for instance. And the projections confirm this trend, since it is almost sure that before the end of this century, the average temperature on Earth will increase by 2 degrees compared to the pre-industrial era. I will not even mention the rise in the sea levels all across the globe you're all aware of. And when we look at averages on periods of 30 years, in order to remove the short time scale variability, we could even say that climate change is accelerating.
Thank you. Professor Ulbrich, your research gets to the heart of the key challenges for European flood undertaking large-scale analysis. What are the key ideas that we have to keep in mind when discussing about climate change?
Well, when you are asking about climate change in general and how we address it, it is important to know that we are making use of climate models. These climate models have inside the knowledge about the physics of climate. Now, each of these models is being run and it produces a certain sequence of weather events. This has nothing to do with the real sequence of weather events, but it is actually a cause of climate variability. And also the observed climate is a certain sequence of weather events. So these to bring together is a challenge that we need to meet. And what we are currently having is that we can just have a best guess by looking at the average of different model runs and how they behave to estimate the long-term change of climate.
And what about extreme events?
Well, when it comes to extreme events, of course, they are most important and they are most relevant to society, also to insurance, of course. And the extreme events are kind of a problem because they often occur on short time scales and on small spatial scales. And the models that we have are only partially able to catch those. And so what we must do is improve the models in terms of the extreme events and try to understand what they are doing and how we can interpret what they are doing in terms of extreme event occurrence and likelihood.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cadu, are the climate risks increasing and why, according to you?
Definitely. The whole insurance industry observes a clear increase in the losses linked to climate-related natural catastrophes. But we have to look at the figures carefully. And when looking at them carefully, it appears that the economic expansion and the accumulation of growth in natural catastrophes-prone areas are the primary drivers of this loss increase. And this will continue. I would like to point out 2 illustrative projections. According to the United Nations, by 2050, 2/3 of the world's population is expected to live in urban areas compared to 50% today. And according to the French Association of Insurers, the losses related to natural catastrophes should double in 20 years, assuming no climate change. So climate risks are increasing, that's a fact, and they should continue to grow. And as the climate change could be a driver accelerating this trend, we can no longer discard it.
So the impact of climate change on extreme natural event is surrounded by uncertainties. Well, it's a major challenge for our societies. What can we do to address these matters, and how can we be better prepared to the unknown?
So regarding the impact of climate change on those extreme events you were mentioning, the unknown, what we have not yet observed, I would say that the only certainty that we have is that significant uncertainties remain. The impacts may very likely differ from one peril to another, or from one region to another. Still, we should get prepared to a general increase in the volatility of those exceptional events. And I do agree with you, this could be one of the major challenges our societies will have to face in the coming decades. Hence, improving our knowledge on climate risks is key. And the role of the academic research is paramount for that. And in that respect, the AXA Research Fund is an essential lever for us to address this climate change challenge, while guaranteeing the excellence of the academic research, the ability of the AXA Research Fund structure to offer interactions between researchers and AXA risk managers definitely is a central benefit to our missions.
Thank you. So, Professor, your investigation aims to address the economic risks of flooding in large river basins under current and future conditions. So what would we learn from it, and can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, this research we are doing is focusing on large river basins. So what we are addressing is an event like what we currently have or just had in Germany. You may have heard about the big losses that are larger than those of the well-known 2002 flood, which was regarded a century, if not millennium event, and now it is there again, and people are saying, what is happening here? And I know that you just have this in France. We just heard about your president that is in southern France, and when I looked it up, I found that it is just 3 years ago that you had in the same region also a major flood event. So what we are trying to address is this, how to estimate these events for present climate and for the future climate. And we are doing this by looking into data that we need for these investigations. And getting this data is quite a challenge. We have such data for the Elbe Basin, mainly from this 2002 event. And so what we can do there is really put up a complete chain modeling the hydrology, the meteorology, and the impacts.
So this is what is so unique about your approach.
Yes, indeed. So what we are trying to do in our project, which is not just related to myself, because I'm from meteorology, but I have a colleague who's closely working with me at Potsdam. He is a hydrologist, and he is doing impact studies from hydrology. So we have set together and developed a concept that is giving us a complete chain from the preconditions that are quite important from the hydrologic side, combined with the meteorological variability, because you do not know exactly where the rain is going to fall in a certain event, and we try to have these risks estimated. And until this river runoff is created, and as you know, the major flood events, if it is not a flash flood event, are not occurring where the rain falls, but really often in the large rivers further downstream. So this is being estimated, how large, how extensive the flood will be and how large the losses are.
Okay, and how do you share the result of your research and your approach beyond your just academic world? And
well, as you say, of course, for us as academics, it is quite important to share our results in the academic world, and we have just yesterday sent out a paper for reviewing on this respect. But what we have done is a major topical conference where we invited not just the academics from the two sides, hydrology and meteorology, but also many different people representing economy. In particular, there were people from insurance and reinsurance companies, and that is one of these approaches. The other that may be quite interesting for many of you is that we have something like climate service centers. In Germany, they have been set up to communicate the scientific knowledge to the stakeholders. And stakeholders are not just the insurance companies. They are often very well informed about natural risks, but also to other companies who are not so well informed and where you, as a scientist, have more difficulties to get their wording and their understanding. So there are these institutions that may be quite helpful.
Very good. And how and what can we predict in the future? What are the main challenges to address, according to you?
Well, in my opinion, there is a mismatch currently between the predictions of climate change that we are using and what is needed by society and by economics. There is a timeline that is there in economics that is much shorter than the century time scale that we are looking when looking at climate change towards the end of this century. We are being told this is not interesting for us. So what we need to do is go and try to estimate climate change on a shorter time scale of maybe 10 years or maybe 30 years. So currently, we are trying to get this variability, which is superimposed to the long-term climate change, in order to give predictions of the climate in the next decades. And this is currently done in Germany, but also in other countries. And if we are successful, we could find out if there is a period upcoming with a very large risk of extreme events of a specific kind, or a low risk. And both are quite relevant because people forget about the risks when there is such a long period of nothing happening.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kadu, one last more question for you. What can we do to better face those uncertainties today and for the future?
I would say that uncertainties around climate change cannot justify inaction. So we as insurers, we have a major role to play within the society to develop risk education, risk prevention, risk mitigation, and risk adaptation techniques. We have collected climate-related data and already developed some models to use them. We support the academic research to improve those models and expand the knowledge on climate risks. We can also design products for promoting less risky behaviors or rewarding prevention measures taken by the clients. We also have the ability to interact with international or governmental institutions to contribute to this global answer required by this global challenge. And even though from a scientific perspective, unfortunately, there is no definitive and complete answer to the question you asked for this session. What is sure is that citizens, governments, scientists, and private sectors have a collective responsibility, and altogether we should act faster and stronger to reduce the potential adverse impacts of climate change.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Thank you.
So we've seen that it really demonstrated the role of the AXA Research Fund, but it also shows how anxious we are to look at innovation and to facilitate public debate. And we also want to have to carry out actions on tomorrow's risks and tomorrow's stakes. So how are we going to work on these stakes and these ambitions in the future? Let's listen to the message now of the new chairman of the Scientific Council, who can't unfortunately be with us today. It's Professor Tom Kirkwood from Newcastle University.
cher Henri de Castries, dear honored guests, I apologize that I cannot be with you today, for I am away in South Korea at the World Congress of Gerontology and Geriatrics. I would like to begin by paying tribute to Professor Suleiman, who has been the president of the AXA Research Fund. As president, Professor Suleiman established the research fund as having the highest academic credentials, applying the most rigorous standards of academic peer review, and linking the fund to leading academic institutions around the world, including some of the developing academic communities, notably in Asia. As new scientific board president, I am fully committed to continuing and developing the reputation for excellence that the AXA Research Fund has established. We will continue to apply the highest standards to select the best scientists from the strongest institutions around the world. In addition, though, we want to encourage dissemination of the findings that come from the research. It's going to be incredibly important as this research goes forward to nurture public debate on issues related to risk that are major challenges for societies all around the world. I would like to thank AXA most sincerely for this unique initiative. I am personally proud to take on the role as president of the scientific board and to have the opportunity to work with this uniquely talented group of distinguished individuals.
The ambition of this fund is to support scientific discovery, but also to encourage researchers to distribute, share, and make their knowledge available in order to stimulate public debate. This type of scientific philanthropy is truly unique. So what can we learn from this first fund, from this first initiative? And what are the new stakes of research? And how today are we transforming the manner of innovating in order to facilitate synergy and have a public debate and facilitate public debate? So within this context, it is my pleasure now to welcome for this roundtable researchers, enlighteners of the public debate, Professor François Tadei, who has a chair financed by the funds at the University of Paris, and Mr. Godefroy Beauvalet, director of the AXA Research Fund. Welcome. So, Mr. Beauvalet, it would seem that to initiate true change and to really stay abreast of the big problems of our day, research is not enough. So you have the AXA Research Fund that you direct. Could you tell us how the fund has functioned in order to invent new manners of bringing about the change? Well, I'll certainly try. So, and we've seen this a lot with the three roundtables that we've just seen: the risk management, the way of working on risk. It's Jean-Christophe Monniot, who's a chief risk manager of AXA, who often says this: risk management, it only starts once you start taking action. And to act, it's complicated because we're talking about risks that we talked about earlier on, whether it's a financial crisis, whether it's living longer, whether it's climate change. We have to change the way of thinking collectively. We have to transform the way in which we live, the way of our practices. So we have to change our perspectives. It's not easy to do. Whether it's positive, of course, learning that we're getting 6 hours older a day. That's interesting, but it's not easy to get used to. And the same thing, to know that we're going to have unbelievable floods every 3 years. That can be disheartening, but we have to get used to this. So in our research, we tried to get three types of response. So the first thing, I think it's Poincaré who once said that science goes very slowly. So we gambled on financing young researchers, and we've financed over 300 young researchers since 2007 with criteria and really performance levels which are very, very high, and we're going internationally, and we're really gambling also on their excellence, but also on their willingness to travel internationally. And this came up in the roundtables also. We are certain today that the university and academic freedom is the foundation upon which what the researchers have to say can come into the public debate. So we've chosen philanthropy as a way of helping research and helping researchers in order to be sure that what they say, that they're completely free to say what they want. We finance their research, we finance what they're doing, but we don't need to have an immediate monitoring. We don't have to follow them in a bureaucratic way of what a researcher is do, because what he wants is to get as close to truth as possible and to publish that truth in his or her particular topic. And then we also tried to have places where we can dialogue, where we can debate, like as we're doing today. And we have to really respect everyone's identity. It's what we discovered. We were sure that it would be the case, otherwise we wouldn't have launched on this. But what these past 6 years have really confirmed for us at the fund, if we respect what the identity of the researchers is, and that they understand who they've got opposite them, we can say a lot of things to each other, we can say fascinating things to each other, and we can change the way we think. So we really are looking we have no interest in this, but it's interesting generally. So what would you say, Professor? What is your view on the evolutions of research and of science today? Well, of course, for us it was a fantastic opportunity because we had a lot of freedom. We could work with Tom Kirkwood, we've just seen on the screen. And it's really a pleasure to work with the best researchers in the world. And they have different ideas, and together we can do things that we couldn't do otherwise. But what's interesting is that the freedom that the fund has provided us, it's we've managed to adapt, and it's enabled us to adapt to the changes and the evolutions that we live through, because research changes, the world changes, the world evolves. So those are things which are really essential. And I think the fact that all the companies that have been financed by the fund, they've really benefited from that. But it's also where we're going towards the general public and to ask questions that are interesting to everyone, whether it's living longer, whether it's climate change, etc. We're really trying to build something together, not only stakeholders in research, not from private companies and public companies, but also from the general citizen. We're trying to study and see how people evolve throughout their life. We want to understand the different paths that people take and the individual ways in which people go beyond themselves throughout their lives. So we started first on bacteria and monodes, and we managed to demonstrate that if bacteria have exactly the same, they have exactly the same longevity as us. They have a genotype which is constant, and we see that in other cells. And we see that even cells that don't move the same way at the same age, and we see that even cells that move faster at the same age than others will live longer. So, but then we try and see how we can look at these questions with mankind. I can do it with cells, I can do it with genotypes, but I can't. How do I do it with the human being? Well, the best thing is asking people and human being to measure themselves and to get them to contribute and to share with what we're doing, and to be monitored throughout their life, and that will give us data which will be really interesting for us. So we're changing the way in which we're looking at things. Of course, we don't look at a human being like we look at a bacteria, but it's the same way of approaching the matter. We're really asking questions which are quantitative, and we want every citizen to be involved. It's not having a big brother type of approach, looking at every single individual. It's each person, each individual have a mirror and looking at himself or herself and understand his or her capacity to evolve throughout his life and its lifespan, and that's something that we've managed to do, and I think we were free to do this through AXA. So if we can come back to the AXA Research Fund, what were the intentions originally for this fund? Well, regarding what was said a bit early on, I think that if I wanted to add 2 points, one to Ezra Suleiman and Anne-Juliette Termont, who was the first director of the fund, when they launched this, I believe that we were in front of research, there were two solutions which existed. One solution was companies are going to finance research and development in academic and institutions and universities. But as David said, it's not simple for insurance, because insurance, we need to know how to share. There's we don't need to own something to know where the next storm will be. We want everybody to be on the same page, to know to think the same thing about how old we're going to live. So the more points in common that we have in society, the better. So technological research and development is not an efficient way of working for insurance, and it can be used in insurance, but we have to go beyond that. And it's maybe a reason why AXA can be a leader in this type of intervention. And as far as research is concerned, Bourdieu says it, it's not me who says it, there's a temptation of the ivory tower sort of approach. And when you're in fundamental research, you can think, right, we mustn't touch that, we mustn't move that. So, but the fund, with a lot of enthusiasm, and it's what we've been trying to do throughout, is to really manage on topics which are promising and important. It's to have solutions which are neither in one corner or the other, but in the middle, and to debate on the topics that we've had for the first fund, but we're going to talk about homeopathy for the next fund, animal diseases, and digital aspects or privacy aspects also. So we're really multiplying all the topics that we need to work on and try and find through financing that we do as patronage. We really want to bring people into it, the general public, but also decision makers, and it has to be private decision makers or public decision makers, and we really want to bring everyone together. And my conviction is that science is really people before everything else, and it's by generating a lot of trust on one side and on the other, and then really bringing everyone together around a table in an informal manner. And it should be fun too, as we say. And in that manner, we're really looking to do something extraordinary, and we're really going very fast. In biology, we say that the evolution of species is a balance, a punctuated equilibrium. There are phases where things go very fast, and then there's stagnation, and there are moments when it really accelerates. And with research, this is what's happening now. It's what we want to generate in everybody who's part of our community, who are not all university and academics. You might have something to say, Professor, about life cycles, ideas. Yes, of course. What's certain is that in the same way that human beings are born fragile, and then they get stronger as time goes by, and then their strength declines, we see the same thing with ideas. And it's sure that it's not exactly the same players who carry the ideas just when they're being born, when they're starting out, and then it's not the same one who are talking about it and being the ambassador later on. So there's a whole life cycle there also. And what's interesting, it's to really accompany the people who are really capable of bringing these ideas to the fore, and to give them the ways of growing, and to test them, and to see how far these ideas can be taken, how they can be adapted to the reality of the world. What's certain is that at times you needed maybe 1 generation, 2 generations between the first phase and these phases. Now we can do in 10 years, if we look at Google, for instance, the research has really accelerated unbelievably, and the world has accelerated unbelievably. In biology, we talk about the Red Queen, who ran very fast but who didn't move. If we really wanted to move, we had to go even faster. And we're in that world today. It's a world where everything's going faster, and we have to learn how to run in a different way, and to find out in which direction we want to run. So we have to form the people who are able to open up new paths, and we have to form the people who can work on these ideas. We have to accompany the young people who can create. You know that the skills that are most requested today didn't exist 10 years ago, and the ones that will be most requested in 10, 20 years don't exist today. So how do we train these young people for tomorrow? We have to train them to have a capacity to adapt themselves, to use the best of networks, the best of machines, the best of human networks that can exist, because if we don't do anything else, because machines know how to do things more and more, tomorrow will be the young people will be replaced by machines. So we have a jobless recovery today, so we have growth, but we're still not managing to create jobs there. It's because we have the technology, but we can't manage to adapt that to the jobs. And we see jobless rates such as in places like Spain, where you have over 50% of young people who are out of work. We have to really rethink the way in which we train people, and it's particularly at the scale of the planet. We'd have to open a new university per day for 20 years to really be able to face up to what's going to happen to these young generations who are now coming through. And it's not just training them like you did in the 19th or 20th century. They have to be trained to really reinvent the future. So that's not an easy problem. Yes, I'd like to add, this is what we can look at in a type of project that we finance. So we have Professor Naveen, who's working in a volcano in Indonesia, and the idea is trying to find how the mudslides produce themselves after the volcano has erupted, and how the cinder is and the ash is brought into mud bath, and there can be mudslides, and they last for over 20 minutes. Some researchers, they find it very difficult to go and follow what happens, because when they arrive, the mudslide is not there anymore. But today, with the equipment of a lot of there's a town of 2 million people, 2 million inhabitants called Jakarta next to this volcano, and a lot of people have video cameras, have iPhones. So nowadays they have these mudslides which are filmed on the videos of the young people who are there. But that we have to train the people to film the video in a manner which can be used, which can be exploited, because there are a number of points that have to be known. They have to have the countdown on them, where they were exactly. So there's a whole work of transforming the relationship between science and society, because we help through an academic institution, but that was something which was totally unimaginable just a few years ago. So Professor Lavigne can tell us more, that when we started out, that didn't exist, and then suddenly it arrived as the project was happening, when being rolled out. So one day we had a discussion, and we were told, oh, well, this wasn't in the initial budget to do this type of thing. But we said, well, yes, so what? So I can't do it. Well, yes, you can, of course, do it, but you have to do it, in effect. You can't. There's no other way to do. You really have to go ahead and do it. So there are a lot of barriers like that we are used to having, and they exist until the moment where you decide, well, there's no reason for this barrier to be there. That's a very interesting example, of course, that you've given. I don't know if you all know, but here there's more power in this than the technology that took NASA to the moon back in 1969. So you can all colonize the moon, which is your own dream moon. So you can colonize it with yourself, but with also other people. But this is a scientific instrument which is connected. So the world is a laboratory, and each one of us is now a researcher. And it's a good point, because we're the researcher that we've invited from Berkeley. And she's said now that children are born researchers. So now you just have to be born and you're a researcher. So if we all have this curiosity that we had when we were a child, and to looking at the world in different world, and trying and testing things, and sharing the results with other people, and generate data and quantify it and analyze it, and together we can then produce knowledge. And that's very interesting. But what we need to do is really simply learn to have this way of being like a child, and then to be always more rigorous and more efficient and more relevant in the way that we research things. So we had an inner city project just outside Paris. We went and talked to the children, and these children are in an attitude of research which is really interesting. They've just discovered something on ants that the specialists in ants that they were working with didn't know. So we went into that because it was published a few years ago. We knew that the youngest authors of scientific publications are 8. So can we systemize that, and can we reproduce such miracles? I think it's a part of our mission as researchers to observe these phenomena which are unexpected, and to study them, and when they can be beneficial, to really maximize the possibility of them being reproduced. And if they're not, well, then we minimize the risks. Well, we take them once they've got their PhDs, but there are challenges, of course. And that's something that we want to have a link between the first fund and the second fund. Of course, we want to pursue the financing of chairs and of PhDs, etc. But we also want to explore, and we want to really innovate and see how we can work on science and society together. And we often think of popularization, vulgarization. Of course, we do that too. We simplify things, and we put, there's an exhibition of photos up there where you see researchers explaining through this exhibition of photos what they're doing exactly. But we're also trying to look for innovative methods. So we got AXA Outlook, which is a vehicle of financing which we're putting together for researchers who want to go towards a new relation with a public decision. So there's simulation, for example. We have a chair at Sciences Po Paris. A few months ago, we reenacted Rio to see what would happen today. So there are numerous things which are possible and a lot to be done. And that's a dimension that we need to study. And that's something that we want to have between Fund 1 and Fund 2 to really explore this interface between science and society. Yes, it's interesting because when you realize the way in which knowledge is transmitted and is taken in and is transmitted again. It's completely evolved over the past 10 years, and that's going to evolve much more. We talk all the time about knowledge and the city of knowledge, but how we've got to know how to get into this city of knowledge and how more and more people can come into this city in order to look at all these challenges that we have nowadays with all these crises that we have at the moment. And we have to be capable of really produce enough knowledge on who we are and where we want to go in order to take up these challenges. And we can only be able to do that if we can all do it together, because as you said, we have to change simultaneously the way in which practically all the players in the society look at things, their perspectives, their points of view. So they're really essential stakes there. And it's this, we're talking about technology of communication of information, and between information and knowledge, there is, of course, we need a human intelligence between both. It's not just technique. So we have to really bring together the best of machine and man. You know, Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster who lost against Deep Blue a few years ago. He said, if your job is like chess, you've got to get ready to change your job. So we should maybe get all ready to change jobs. But then he worked on advanced chess, which is men together against machines. So what he demonstrated is that man and machine is better than man alone. But man and man is better than machine alone. So we should really have machines in all of the schools. But what he did also, he played against the whole world. And Karpov, who the previous world champion, had done the same thing. And he won really easily. But when Kasparov did it, he played one of the hardest games of his life, because from the same time we'd gone from collective stupidity to intelligence to collective intelligence, because meanwhile the world had learned to work together, or the individuals had learned to work together, and they're working in a much finer and accurate way. So we have to know when we have to trust our own personal intuition, or when we have to trust the collective intuition, and when we must use the machine and when. Because when Kasparov organized these competitions against the machines, it's not the best man with the best machine that won. It was two men with three machines who weren't grandmasters themselves, but they had trust in their intuition, and then they trusted machine 1, 2, or 3. So that is a change of paradigm, and I think we need to invent this new type.
We are reaching the end of the time allotted to this meeting, so could you please conclude with what you would like us to retain, is perhaps to add something that we didn't mention regarding what Fund 1 has taught us and what we wish to use, to return to what François said. In fact, there are many people sitting around the table wanting to contribute to the science, but there's also another point which involves scientific emergences. And today we have started to, of course, attract people through our funding, because we do attract people who are of scientific excellence, but we also have different chairs in Hong Kong, in China. We have projects in Mexico, in Indonesia, in Turkey, in Poland. And we see that scientific excellence is a game that most countries can play, that most individuals can play because they can belong to many international social networks in their countries and different networks as well. So it is interesting for us here to launch an appeal to the research of those countries so that they come to us and we can get organized to not confuse good application and a good project, which of course is the subtlety of the scientific board. And this is why we have selected the people who are members of the board. And there are 50% women, 50% men, simply
la réalité de la science. Donc,
because this is today the reality of science, and this is what we want to do. We want to be able to contribute to this transformation, to this raising awareness, and to this increasing awareness as well in many more countries. And there are some countries that are in difficulty today, particularly those that are confronted with a crisis, and particularly where public researchers are strongly impacted by this. So we can, of course, take the place of what should have been done in those countries. It's not the same order of amplitude, but we can certainly here favor the transformations which will allow research to simply always be focused on increasing public budgets and obtaining more funding. This is what we have already started to do as of 2013. Thank you very much. We have come to the end almost of this afternoon. It is my pleasure to conclude by welcoming once again the Chairman and CEO of the AXA Group, Mr. Henri de Castries. Thank you. It is unfortunately the time to conclude, and I say unfortunately because when I see the enthusiasm and passion of our speakers, we see that we could have kept this up for several hours, and my regret is that there are a certain number of researchers in the room with whom we have worked and whom we have helped, and it would have been wonderful to hear them as well. I'm sure that they will have the opportunity of doing so in other circumstances. I think that what we have experienced this afternoon shows how we are, in fact, in a world that is radically changing. For my part, I have never felt so closely what finite and infinite meant. 70 years ago, Paul Valéry had written, the era of the finite world begins, which means that everything was getting shorter, knowledge was growing more and more, and was transmitted more and more quickly. It is true that in a certain way we are in a finite world because what is happening at one extremity of the planet is immediately felt by the other extremity. But this has never offered as many possibilities before. When we look at the multiplication of scientific research, what Professor Tadei called collective intelligence and networking, we can see that we truly are in a period that is indeed a genuine renaissance. The world is reinventing itself. Sometimes, unfortunately, in the developing world, we are in societies that are afraid of the future and that no longer have trust in progress. What I would like is for us to be a tiny little pebble together, AXA and the scientific community, AXA quite modestly, humbly, and the scientific committee less humbly, because it is its role and its mission to restore trust in the future and in progress within our societies, so that our societies can again return to trusting the future and progress. To do this, the scientific community has to communicate more, to publicize what it does, because they are researchers with lights in a tunnel that is infinite and that slowly but surely leads to light. So I am delighted that we are in a position tonight to announce a similar donation to the one we have already given. I think that these financial resources will be well used. We have established a mutual climate of trust. And here we'd like to thank the presidents, but also Godefroy Beauvalet and our other friends who bear this on a daily basis. I would also like to thank you and to tell you in the next 45 years we will have a similar meeting where we will continue to reinvent ourselves and maintain our faith in the future and in progress. Thank you all. We are now going to stop the formal part of our celebration, but I invite you to climb the stairs and admire the pictures and perhaps the buffet that are awaiting you upstairs. Thank you all.